Hey, Summerhill Cinema 700 here with a movie review of the, I believe, 1980 film, Fort Apache, The Bronx. So I'd never seen this film before and I watched it for the first time several days ago, and I ended up enjoying it enough that I thought I'd do a little movie review. Now, I'm not going to do like a movie dash Blu-ray, or in this case, movie dash DVD review, because there's not really much to this DVD other than, well, nothing actually. So we'll just do a movie review. So again, like I said, I had never seen this movie before, but I had heard about it, and I knew that it took place in a grimy New York City, and as you know, that's one of my favorite filming locations, and in the Bronx especially too, which is even better. So to get started on this film, the two main stars in this film are Paul Newman and Ken Wall. Ken Wall is popular for some of his other films that he did were The Wanderers, kind of similar film to The Warriors, kind of like a gang-like movie, and then The Soldier too, James Glickenhaus, crazy action film. These are just a few of the other films he was in. He's a really good actor, though. I enjoy his his roles in the films. But anyways, I have a few notes here to kind of keep me on track, so I'll just go through this film. So basically, at the start, we see these, or actually, at the very beginning, we just kind of see this cool footage of the South Bronx and this kind of cool music playing, and then right after that, we like see this hooker walking down the street, and she goes up to these cops sitting in a cop car, presumably on their lunch break or whatnot, and the hooker is actually played by Pam Grier. So she walks up to the car. She's like talking to them for a few minutes, kind of like flirting with them and whatnot. And then just all of a sudden, out of the blue, she just like pulls out this gun and shoots them and kills them both. And right after it happens, there's all like these like gangster thug guys like running over to the car and looting the stuff and taking it out and whatnot. So after that, it ends up that these were like two rookie cops. We find out shortly later in the film that they were like new on the job and whatnot. And then we get introduced to like all we see like the police station, this Fort Apache police station, and we get introduced to Paul Newman's character and Ken Wall along with the sergeant who's going to be leaving soon. It's like his last day on the job before he retires and whatnot. So then we start following some of like the calls that these guys are going on, and we see a lot of like cool like Bronx locations, South Bronx early '80s locations. And like one of the first calls they're going to, there's like this guy, and he's like standing up on a roof, and he's gonna like jump off, like he's like suicidal. And they go up there and they stop him, and I think he's like a drag queen or something because he's got like these like this weird wig and stuff on and whatnot. But anyways, they end up saving him, and then they take him to the hospital and whatnot. And then there's a little bit of stuff going on there. And then the next kind of thing that happens while they're kind of out on patrol, of course, Ken Wall and Paul Newman are police partners in this film. So anyways, they're driving around, and I see this like crook guy, and he steals this lady's purse, and he runs off, and they're kind of like chasing him, and he ends up getting away. And then this other cop kind of comes up, and we kind of get introduced to this scumbag cop, and we're like, okay, we know that this guy's going to be like a total prick. He's like, oh, you should have just shot him. He's like, oh, you could have just said that he tried to pull a knife on you or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he says, but he's like, oh, you should have just shot him. Because he's like one of those corrupt police officers or something like that. Pardon me. So shortly after that, they're driving around. We see this pimp beating the fuck out of this prostitute, and then we see it's Pam Grier again. So he's like beating the hell out of her. So they pull up to him. They're like, "What's going on here? What are you doing?" And he's like, "This bitch," or something like that. He's like really pissed off with her or whatnot. And then they kind of like figure out what's going on. And it's kind of funny. Like Paul Newman like smashes his headlights out, and he's like, "How do you like that?" And he like breaks his windshield wiper off. He's like, "How do you like that?" It's just kind of a funny scene. Shortly after that, then we see this like psycho lunatic guy. He's like waving a knife at all these people. He's like blah 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 with a knife and all this crazy stuff. And then Paul Newman, he gets out of the police car. It's kind of funny, and he walks over to the guy, and he's like, and he's like acting like a lunatic himself. And it ends up that him acting like this lunatic gets the original lunatic to drop his knife, and he like saves the day, so and whatnot. So it's kind of funny. And then we go back down to the police station. We see that the station's gotten this new captain because the old one, like I said, retired. And the new captain's kind of a jerk. But in a sense, he just wants more strict rules at the police station and better practices and whatnot. He thinks that the police force is kind of weak and they need to become more strong and whatnot. But he's like walking around and he wants to like paint the walls and he's like, that picture there looks really ugly, and he wants to like change the stuff and whatnot. And anyways, they're kind of like going about their police business. There's also a scene where they like go to this apartment and there's like a call for, I don't know why someone called them. I don't know why they didn't call like paramedics, but they go to this like apartment and there's like this girl there. She's only like, I think she says she's 14 years old and she's pregnant. She's giving birth. It's kind of disturbing. But they help her give birth and whatnot. And then shortly after that, we see them like at the hospital because I guess they took this girl there. And then what's his name? Sorry, Paul Newman's character in the film is kind of like hitting on this like nurse that's working there, and she's like, oh, whatever. All the police officers always try to pick me up and whatnot, and he keeps trying to like pick her up and whatnot, and then he ends up taking her out eventually in the film. And then we see Ken Wall's character, and he has like this girlfriend too that he goes over to her place and like hangs out with. She lives with her parents, so there's like it's kind of a long scene where like they show Paul Newman trying to take out this nurse, and then Ken Wall's character, he's like going over to visit his girlfriend and whatnot. Then there's this scene where there's this like old guy. He's like cars pulled over on the side of the road, and he's like changing his wheel. So again, this is like the next scene kind of after that, and he's like changing his wheel, and then we see Pam Grier walking down the street, and she like takes him into this building. She's like, "Oh, honey, you want a good time and whatnot," and then she just like, I think she slashes his neck or something, or she stabs him in the gut. She just kills him, right? And it's like, holy crap! Like she's just kind of like this nutcase. She's on speed or whatnot, going around killing people. She's a cop killer. And of course, that's a lot of what this movie's following is just trying to figure out who's this cop killer, right? Because that's like the biggest crime that's happened in the Bronx so far. And I should mention that this whole film takes place in the South Bronx, so pretty much it's just them driving around, and you see all these awesome early '80s Bronx locations. So it's pretty cool. Again, he's like, there's a scene where the new captain's speaking to the whole police station, like, we need new rules, we need stricter things to go on. And anyway, so there's like more scenes of Ken Wall and Paul Newman driving around trying to find these cop killers, trying to get answers out of people. Have you seen this person? Have you seen that person? And whatnot. And then they have like this. There's a scene where they like take over like a school bus and they fill it up with like suspects and whatnot, and they're driving around. It's kind of weird. There's a lot of different things that happen in this film. And then all of a sudden there's this big riot that's like starting in the Bronx. You see all these people like walking around with like pitchforks and torches, and they're like smashing windows and all this crazy stuff. So they're headed to the precinct, to the police station, and they're like outside and they're like throwing tomatoes and stuff like that, and just like protesting. I can't remember exactly what it is they're protesting, but and then the new sergeant just walks out, the new captain of the police station. He's just like, just tear gas them. so they just like shoot tear gas at them and stuff like that, and that kind of gets rid of them. And they take a few of them in and arrest them and whatnot. And anyways, while this riot's happening, there's a couple of the rioters, I guess they're up on the roof throwing down fruit or whatnot. And you see this one police officer who was the police officer who I mentioned earlier, who was like, oh, you should have just shot him. And he actually takes this like, presumably like, teenager or something. He just takes him and throws him off the roof. And Ken Wall and Paul Newman's character, they're up on like a roof, like across the way in a building beside it, and they see this. They're watching him like argue with this teenager, and then you see the police officer just pick him up and throw him off the building. It's like, holy shit, that's police corruption at its finest there, ladies and gentlemen. So and of course there's like other scenes where we keep seeing like Pam Grier pop up and this and that and whatnot. And so yeah, like I mentioned, she takes that old guy into that building, slashes his face and stuff with a razor, and then stabs. Or where am I here? Okay, never mind. This is a different scene. I was kind of getting mixed up there. So she killed that old guy. Later on, after we see all the rioting happening, there's this other guy. I think it's a different guy. And she like does like a lap dance or something, and I just have written down here, Slash, oh yeah, yeah. So there's like this guy visiting her. I can't remember who they are. Like people that are supplying her with drugs, and she does like a lap dance or something like that. And then all of a sudden, she's like, I'm a snake, and this, I'm a cobra, and she like slashes his face with like a razor, and then he stabs her in the gut, and I think she dies then. And it's just like, okay, that's the end of her. So the cop killer's dead, and then Paul Newman's character, he goes to this bar like after his shift. He's getting a beer, and he sees the killer cop, the cop who threw the guy off the building, the corrupt police officer, and they get in like this big brawl outside the bar, and there's like a pretty good fist fight happening, and so Paul Newman's character is kind of explaining to Ken, like we got to turn this guy in, and Ken's like, you can't do that. It's not worth it. You like if you do this, like you're gonna like lose your job. Like you can't snitch on another police officer, but he wants to because he knows that this police officer is corrupt. He's killed somebody, and like the captain at the station keeps asking people like, do you know anything about police corruption in this station, or is there any? And they're all like, no. But Paul knows that there is, that this police officer is guilty for this hideous crime. So they're trying to figure out how they can go about basically ratting out this cop because he is indeed a bad cop. And Ken Wall's character is like, it's not worth it. And anyway, something that I forgot to mention earlier too is that there's a scene too where Paul Newman and his new like girlfriend, who's that nurse, they're just like laying down in bed and whatnot, and he notices on her leg that there's like a little mark, like little poking marks, like from a needle. So he suspects, I guess, that she's shooting up on drugs, and then he finds out later that she is actually using drugs, that she's using like heroin and whatnot. So he confronts her about that. And then, anyways, shortly after that, they're like driving in a car, and she's just like, Paul Newman and his girlfriend, they're driving in a car, and she's just like, I just want to get out and walk for the rest of the way. And then she ends up going to this building, meeting with these two drug dealers, and they know that she's dating this cop and whatnot, so they give her some bad dope. And then we see her like the next day, she just walks outside of her apartment, and she's just like so wasted. She's just like walking down the street, she can barely even stand. And you see like this guy watching her, and then she just like collapses on the ground. Well, anyways, she ends up overdosing and dying. It's pretty sad, actually, in the film. And then the drug dealers that gave her that drug, they go to they go to the like local hospital, and they like hold it up. They take all these nurses hostage and whatnot. And anyways, then Paul Newman and then this other guy, I can't remember who the other guy is. He's just like this random character who pops up. They sneak into the hospital. They take out the guys. And then Paul finds out the tragic news that his girlfriend has passed away, and it's like a really sad scene. Like he like picks her up. He thinks she's still alive. He's like, please breathe for me, and it's a pretty sad scene. He's like trying to wake her up, but she's already long gone from this drug overdose. So it's a pretty sad scene, and then anyways, around the end of this film, Paul Newman's character finally. He's had enough. He walks into the station and he says, I know who killed that kid. It was this so-and-so cop in our station. He's the one that did it. He's corrupt and this and that. And then he throws his badge on the table. He's like, look, I'm done. I quit. And then the captain's like, look, I know you're a good cop. You don't need to do this. And he's like, whatever, I'm done. Throws his badge down, leaves. And then anyways, he's driving off in his car, and then all of a sudden, Ken Wall's character pops up in the back seat, freaks him out, and it's a really cool like ending to this movie. They're just driving around like he's telling Ken, I'm done, like I quit, I'm done with this job, unfortunately, and Ken Wall's character is like, what? Like now I have to do this on my own, and then all of a sudden while they're driving, they see the guy who I think earlier in the film was the guy who stole the purse, who got away. They see him like doing another robbery, and he jumps out of a window, and then all of a sudden they're just like, we better get him, and then they just like chase after them, and then there's this scene where they're just chasing after the guy, and then the final scene's just like Paul Newman's character just jumping up in the air like this, and then it's like a freeze frame, and then the movie ends there. So it's kind of really cool how it ends like that. So I guess he's back on the force. But this is a pretty cool film, it's nothing incredible, but it's nonetheless a very entertaining film, and it's kind of cool how it deals with just, the day-to-day activities in this, at this Fort Apache police station in the Bronx, South Bronx, and just what's going on in their day-to-day kind of things that they have to deal with. And then it's also following kind of like this police corruption story, which is pretty interesting, and then also the story of love and stuff with Paul Newman and Ken Wall's girlfriends, and then the tragedy that she passes away from an overdose. So I'd say it's a pretty damn good film, and of course you get a ton of that early '80s South Bronx filming locations that aren't there anymore, and yeah, so that's Fort Apache, the Bronx. New York Magazine says it's Newman's most dramatic and realistic performance, and so they definitely say that this is an awesome movie. It's about 2 hours long. It's very entertaining, and it's a good time. So if you've seen Fort Apache, the Bronx, let me know what you think of it. If not, do you plan on watching it? And I think that's pretty much all there is to say. I enjoyed this film. Out of 5 stars, I'd probably give it 4.5. It was an entertaining film for sure. So thank you very much for watching my video on Fort Apache, the Bronx, and we'll see you next time.